Hello, music fans. This is Death by Unicorn, where we talk about metal rock and prog music. Today, I'm talking about 10 new albums that came out over the last week in my segment called What's New 2024. I'm going to give my quick first impressions of these 10 albums that I listened to, and I'll talk about them in my order of preference, starting with Ancients and their album Beyond the Reach of the Sun. This is the third album by this Canadian band. It's progressive sludge metal with death metal influences. And this one is a near masterpiece. It's for fans of Mastodon and Opeth. Sounds like a mix of those bands, and it's just so good. I had to binge watch or binge listen to their previous two albums as well, which were also excellent. So now I've got a new band to add to my growing list of favorites. I think I just love Canadian prog metal, and I think anyone who loves Mastodon will love them. But then it's got that even harsher death metal growl of Opeth from time to time. Nice mix of clean singing and harsh vocals. Really good balance between the brutality and the beauty in this band. Check out Ancients Beyond the Reach of the Sun if that appeals to you. Next, I want to talk about Leprous and their album Melodies of Atonement. This is the 8th album by this Norwegian band. It's progressive metal with art rock, synth pop, alternative, experimental influences. And this one I'm putting in my excellent tier. I love this band. They have to be in my top 40 favorite bands of all time. I think they have the potential of rising. Everything Leprous has released after their first demo, Silent Waters, which was a little rougher production-wise, but still good. But everything else has been at least a near masterpiece. And I think their 4-album run from Bilateral to Melina are all masterpieces for me, and some of the best albums in progressive metal and progressive rock, kind of like worthy of my top 200 of all time. And I've seen Leprous live. They put on an amazing show. Based on the quality of the singles, the first two singles I heard of ahead of time, Atonement and Silently Walking Alone, I figured I'd be shocked if this album doesn't end up in my top 10 albums at the end of the year. However, I don't think it's going to. After my first couple listens to the album, I did notice a lot of the songs followed a similar formula where they were very samey. The melodies are great. The powerful climaxes of the song are always awesome, and Einer's vocals are great, though his voice may be an acquired taste and might sound a bit strange to the traditional pop music listener. He goes really high pitched and he really goes for it when he is those high notes and belts it out. It is great to hear him do a scream on this album, but the album is still 99% clean vocals. However, so far this has been maybe my least favorite release from Leprous, but it's still an excellent album. It's just hard for me to compare. It's hard to compare to their other studio albums that are just like near masterpiece and masterpiece level. Maybe this just needs some time to grow on me. Um, Maybe I was just hoping they would try something a little newer and keep pushing the boundaries. Just worried they might have fallen into a rut and they're doing some samey stuff. Still an amazing band. I want to see them continue the quality and step up their game as they go forward. Maybe get back onto the level of the stuff that I really love. But I still enjoy this. I'll still be listening to this and spinning it. I see myself listening to this a lot in the future. That's Leprous and their album Melodies of Atonement. Next up, I want to talk about Wintersun and their album Time 2. This is the 4th album by this Finnish band. It's melodic death metal with power metal, symphonic metal, black metal, neoclassical metal, folk metal, and progressive metal influences. They've even got some Japanese folk music influences in here. And this one I'm putting in my excellent tier as well. And this album has been a really long time in the making. It's been seven years since the last album by Wintersun and 12 years since Time 1, the prequel to this album. There was a lot of drama online about how long this took, since there was a crowdfunding campaign for this album so long ago, and then no album followed that. So a lot of the people who crowdfunded it were worried maybe they just put their money into a scam, but now it's finally here. So it is real. I don't know all the details of the drama around the crowdfunding, but I've seen lots of comments, discussion, and articles about that. And I'm glad the people who crowdfunded all those years ago finally got their album. Hopefully the next one comes faster from Wintersun. This album has some really cool Japanese influences that I don't recall hearing as much of on their earlier albums. They've got both harsh and clean vocals on here. The guitar playing is amazing. The production sounds great too. There's lots of layers, lots of keyboards, just a big sound that I really enjoy. Some people may criticize it for maybe even being overproduced, but I think all the money from the crowdfunding had to go to something, and I like the sound of the production. I like the big sound. Maybe people who prefer a more kind of stripped back and organic metal band sound won't like this, but if you like big production with lots of different instruments and like ethnic instruments and lots of keyboards, and I feel like there might even be real orchestral bits on here. I'm not sure, it might all be programmed, but it just has this big sound. Think like Devin Townsend with all the layers, and I really enjoy it. That's Time 2 by Wintersun. It right now, it might just be because it's new, but right now it might actually be my favorite Wintersun album. And everything they do is great. So definitely check out Time 2 by Wintersun if you like melodic death metal and if you like really layered music with great guitar playing. Next up, I want to talk about Tigran Hamasyan and his album, The Bird of a Thousand Voices. This came out on August 30th, as did all the other ones that I've talked about so far. This is the 11th album by this Armenian artist. It's jazz fusion with progressive rock, art rock, ambient pop, and even some metal and Armenian folk influences in there. Tigran Hamasyan is just an amazing Armenian jazz pianist and composer. Imagine like a jazzy version of Emerson, Lake and Palmer colliding with the syncopation, polyrhythms, and polymeter of gent like Meshuggah combined with progressive, ambient, almost new age vibes of Mike Oldfield. This album focuses heavily on piano, so it will appeal mostly to people who like piano, and a lot of the runtime is instrumental, but there are some vocals on here. A lot of the vocals are wordless vocalizations. It almost feels like an instrumental album, even though there's quite a bit of vocal moments on this album. So I don't think it really counts as an instrumental album, but it has that vibe to it. And the album is really long, at just over an hour and a half. At first, when it started, I was a bit worried about that run length, thinking I'd get bored if it was just piano shred the whole time. But I was pleasantly surprised at how much variety and experimentation he was able to bring, while also making it feel like the album's a cohesive piece with some repeating themes throughout the album. And it's not just piano, he does a lot of synth and other things on here too. So a lot of like keyboard driven instruments, but he changes up the sound a lot so it doesn't, so you know, each song sounds a little different. There's 24 tracks on here, and some of them have, a lot of them have really long names here. My favorite tracks on first couple of listens were The Demon of Akan Anatak and 40 Days in the Realm of Bottomless Eye. He brings light into the soil of evil. So really long song names. I feel like from the song names and how the album flows and has repeated themes, it seems like it's probably some kind of concept album, but I'm not too sure what the concept is. But it kind of feels like there's this narrative flow, even though there's not really a lot of words, if any. Like, it's hard to pick up on any words. It seems like a lot of wordless vocals and chanting over piano, but it feels like a story. I really enjoyed it. If this sounds appealing to you, check out The Bird of a Thousand Voices by Tigran Hamasyan to hear some amazing, crazy, progressive, jazzy, metal gent piano. And next up, I want to talk about one that came out on September 1st by Circe Link and Christian Nesmith, and it's called Arcana. This is the second album by this American duo. It's progressive rock, I'm also going to put it in my excellent tier. And both of the artists in here have made many other albums before, but this is their second album as a duo. The female vocals on here are provided by Circe. The album sounds like classic 70s prog rock for fans of Mike Oldfield, Yes, and Jethro Tull. It ends with an almost 16-minute epic song called The Chariot. And my favorite track on first listen was The Tower, the opening track. I'm looking forward to listening to this again and perhaps going back to check out the debut album by this duo and see if it's as good or better. I'm curious to hear it. If that sounds appealing to you, if you like the classic 70s prog and want to hear it done with a little modern twist and some female vocals, check out Arcana by Circe Link and Christian Nesmith. Now we're going to jump down to my very good tier. I'm going to start by talking about Bent Knee and their album 20 Pills Without Water, the seventh album by this American band. And this is art rock, a little bit of like avant-garde influence and Baroque pop, alternative and indie rock in there. Very good tier. I'm a fan of this band, but I wasn't very happy with their last album, Frosting, from 2021. So I was hoping that this album would get them back on form to making music that I'd enjoy. As always, they've got great female vocals by Courtney Swain, and I think it's too bad to see that Ben Levin is no longer with the band, because I really like the vibes that he brought. This single, Illiterate, was one that I heard ahead of the release. It sounds better than what they were doing on Frosting, but just not quite up to their peak material from earlier in their career. I like their 3-album run from Shiny Eyed Babies to Land Animal. I think that was an excellent run, so I was hoping they could come back to that level and that vibe, but I respect and appreciate that they're going to make whatever kind of music they want to. When I listened to the full album here, I liked it a lot more than Frosting from 2021, but not quite as much as the 3-album run they have from Shiny Eyed Babies to Land Animal. So 20 Pills Without Water by Bent Knee is a very good album, but just not quite excellent for me. Next, I'll talk about Amiensus and their album Reclamation Part 2. This is the 5th album by this American band, and it's progressive, atmospheric, melodic black metal with death metal influences. Also in my very good tier. I thought Part 1 from earlier this year was excellent, so I was really looking forward to this. Part 1 has mostly harsh vocals, but some nice female clean vocals from time to time. Part 2 carries on this sound with mostly harsh black metal vocals, but some clean vocals. I didn't like it quite as much as Part 1, but I still found it very good for anybody who's a fan of the kind of extreme, progressive, atmospheric black metal with a lot of melody in there. Now we're going to move to my good tier, and for that I've got Tusmorke and their album Dawn of Oberon, the 11th album by this Norwegian band. This is progressive folk rock with psychedelic influences. For fans of Jethro Tull, due to their prominent use of flute and a lot of medieval sounding influences on here. There's no guitar in Tusmorke, which is unusual for progressive rock music. It's just bass, flute, keyboards, drums, and vocals. It's all played very well, though, but I'm not a huge fan of the vocal style, delivery, and performance. I feel like I have potential. This band has a lot of potential. I could love this band if they got an excellent singer and guitar player. But until then, they're just a good band for me who has this slightly quirky, weird, and interesting sound that I'll probably check out in the future, even though they never quite get there for me. I think their last album, Hestehoven, might actually just be a bit better than this album, but I had the same concerns with it as well as everything that I've heard from them. I just want to hear something a little bit better in the vocal department. And of course, it would be the cherry on top if they had some guitar. But I guess that's not what they're about. If you want to hear what this kind of medieval sounding flute prog rock music that has no guitar sounds like, definitely check out Tusmorke and Dawn of Oberon. And lastly, I've got 2 albums left to talk about. These are going to be in my average tier, so not as strong of recommendations, but some stuff that I listened to that I still wanted to mention. First one that I'm going to mention is Jonsi and his album First Light, the 4th album by this Icelandic musician well known for being in Sigur Rós. This is post-rock, but it's very classical. He's the front man of Sigur Rós, and this is mostly instrumental, orchestral, classical sounding post-rock that could really be a good film score, but isn't a very engaging listen for me as an album. I would have liked to hear more of Jonsi's vocals on this album, and I think this could have been a much better album if they just had more vocals. I wonder if maybe he wrote this as for a film score and then just kind of released it as an album. Maybe if the movie didn't proceed. Not sure what the story behind this album is, but for me, it didn't quite land, and I'd really love to just hear him do more music with Sigur Rós, which I think would be a lot better than this. And lastly, I want to mention Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds and the album Wild God. This is the 18th album by this Australian band. And the genre is hard to describe. It's kind of like experimental alternative rock with like gothic rock, art rock, post-punk, ambient, electronic, blues, and country all mixed together. They're very experimental, genre-bending, and hard to categorize. I heard the single Wild Gods ahead of time. Now, the vocals on this whole album are going to be the make or break feature for people on this, because Nick Cave has this peculiar way of singing that I'm not sure I fully embrace it, but it is interesting, and the music is fascinating too. I think this album, though, is more about the lyrics than the music or the sound, so that makes it hard for me to get into, as I'm more of a music person, and if the music doesn't stick out to me as interesting, then there's not too much to grab me or make me want to listen to it again. I didn't think this album was bad musically, but it was just a little dull, kind of slow, uninteresting, and average, and kind of melodramatic. And the vocal sound really didn't work for me on here. So for that reason, I'm not sure I'll go back to this one, Wild God by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. I'm just going to put it in my average tier. When I hear something and I just think it's kind of average, dull, and boring, I don't tend to really go back to it much. But if you're a fan of Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds and you like the vocal style and maybe you like his kind of poetic lyrics or something, I think there's a lot to enjoy here. I think a lot of people will like it. It's probably just not for me. So for that reason, I'm putting it in my average tier. And that's it for my first impressions of these 10 albums that came out over the last week. What do you think of these albums? Let me know what your thoughts down in the comments. And is there anything else that came out recently that you think I'll enjoy? Also let me know. And hit that subscribe button if you want to see my first impressions of albums I'm going to listen to over the next week. I'll be listening to Jordan Rudess' Permission to Fly, Pure Reason Revolution, Coming Up to Consciousness, David Gilmour's Luck and Strange, Future Palace Distortion, The's, Ensoulment, and God is an Astronaut, Embers. Those are the ones that I know I'll be listening to, or that I plan to listen to at this point, and maybe there's some others that are going to pop up. Stay tuned to the channel if you want to see my impressions on those, and hit that subscribe button. Until next time, peace out.